feedback we've had from the border is that the relationship between communities and the police has been extremely positive, people appreciating and understanding the circumstances we find ourselves in, and the fact that this will be a stressful few days for many people throughout both parts of our states. I also want to stress my appreciation to Service New South Wales and the staff who worked literally overnight to process in excess of 50,000 permits which have since been issued, which includes people in those border communities but also those with other extenuating circumstances. I do want to send a very strong warning. The probability of contagion in New South Wales, given what's happening in Victoria, is extremely high. The probability that we need to be tougher on those border restrictions is extremely high. I ask everybody in those border communities, including residents in New South Wales who live in Albury or Moama or other places across the border, do not travel to other parts of New South Wales unless you absolutely have to. If you are an Albury resident, we do not recommend you travelling to other parts of New South Wales. And if we feel in the next few days or as early as tomorrow that we need to further protect the community, we will consider what we do north of Albury. Now, I know that's an imposition also for people who live in other parts of New South Wales, but my strong warning to people in New South Wales is do not travel to those border communities unless you absolutely have to. Absolutely have to. We can certainly control what happens on our side of the border. We can't control what's happened on the other side of the border, and I've already had advice this morning of at least one person from Wodonga who has the virus. We're still awaiting details. But given the appreciation we have for police and Service New South Wales in standing up the permit process, that carries with it enormous risk. Because when you have communities mixing with each other, crossing a border, it carries enormous risk. So I will stress that the government is considering what further action we take to make sure the bubble, as we call it, of those border communities is maintained. And so for communities like Wagga and others who have close interaction with people in Albury, I ask you not to visit those border communities from other parts of New South Wales unless you absolutely have to. And similarly, we say to New South Wales residents who live in those border communities, do not move outside your border community unless it's absolutely necessary. Otherwise, we will need to take further action, which could further compromise your ability to move freely. We don't take these decisions lightly, and I appreciate people will have varying degrees of opinion on what occurs, but I have no doubt what the responsibility of the New South Wales Government is. We're providing every support we can to our Victorian counterparts. The situation in Victoria is extremely serious. And I also want to stress that the border closure between New South Wales and Victoria cannot be compared to any other border closure around Australia. No other border has at least 55 places. No other communities, even though there are some border communities obviously impacted or were impacted with New South Wales and Queensland, New South Wales virtually had zero community transmission on those borders. We can't be assured that's the case with Victoria. So whilst we've allowed these permits, whilst we've allowed a degree of flexibility until this point, do not assume this will continue. We are monitoring this situation every few hours because, as I said, whilst we're assured of the advice we get on this side of the border, the Victorian government, the Victorian community is under immense pressure, and the contact tracing and other practices we have on this side of the border, we can't be assured are necessarily happening on the other side of the border. And so for that reason, the government will be considering potentially further action in relation to those border communities. I know I've already said it in the last minute or two, but I want to say it again. If you live on a border community and you're a New South Wales resident, please do not travel outside your border community at this time. If you are a New South Wales resident outside of those border communities, please do not go to those communities unless you absolutely have to. We are in a high-risk situation, and I don't want to see the good work we've done in New South Wales undone. And I issue a warning that if the government has to take further action, we will. I also want to foreshadow that it won't be anything major, but we are considering tweaking some health orders in New South Wales to ensure additional safety in relation to some types of gatherings, and we will have more to say about that tomorrow morning. But I just want everybody to be on notice that we're reviewing, given that we do have so many permits that have been issued. We've got so many people from Wodonga and other community borders moving across the border. That level of risk has to be assessed against what we have in New South Wales. And whilst we've respected the right of those communities to continue, we will continue to assess that, as I said, on a daily basis. I also want to stress to businesses, not just in those border communities, but especially in those border communities, but also throughout the state. Whilst it's pleasing to see that over 100,000 businesses have downloaded the app on how to be COVID safe, the checklist on how to be COVID safe, there's only been about 10% of those businesses who've actually gone through the process of registering. Now, I'm concerned with the lack of compliance in New South Wales of some hospitality venues, in particular cafes and restaurants. Basic things like sharing a salt and pepper shaker, for example, and I get to that level of detail, but basic things like that are a health risk. And when businesses choose not to adhere to the checklist, it is a risk to everybody. And we will be stepping up, and this is why Minister Dominello is here. And in addition to thanking him for what he and his team have done overnight, he and I are also here to deliver a very strong message of compliance. We will be stepping up compliance in relation to businesses throughout the state. The onus is on those businesses to make sure they're COVID safe, but the onus is also on us to make sure we don't frequent a business that's not COVID safe, and we certainly raise the alarm if a business is not progressing in a COVID safe manner. So today my message to New South Wales residents is thank you so much for the work we've done so far, but the bubble, the so-called bubble we're creating in those border communities will only work and be successful if we have strong compliance. And if we see that what we've allowed at this point is too much of a health risk, we will need to take further action. And again, we are dealing with, first of all, closer geographic proximity to areas which have high levels of community transmission, a high number of border crossings, and also interaction with those border communities unlike anything else we have in Australia. And that in itself poses an extremely high risk. I cannot stress that enough. But I again say how grateful I am. New South Wales has been able to come this far so far because of the outstanding teamwork we have. How the police have managed to do what they've done in the last couple of days is just outstanding. To service New South Wales, what they've been able to stand up overnight, to know that in excess of 50,000 people have a type of permit today in 3 different categories to be able to make those border crossings, and also the work of our health officials. It's become apparent to me that the high level of logistical organisation, the contact tracing, the testing that we have is really, really holding us up well. And can I also encourage people on those border communities to get tested? If you have a scratchy throat, if you sneeze, go and get tested. I also want to issue the same warning for people to get tested, and Dr. Chant will have further to say about this. In communities like Merimbula, where there have been a lot of people holidaying, in communities like Ballina, where there have been a lot of people holidaying, sometimes an infection can bubble away for a month or so and bubble under the surface. So we need to be additionally vigilant in those communities which have a high number of tourists. When I say tourists, obviously from other states, but especially Victoria. And I ask communities in particular on the border, at places like Merimbula, places like Byron and Ballina, to make sure they get tested at the mildest symptom, because it's our high rates of testing and the contact tracing that will keep people as safe as possible. It is a critical phase in the pandemic. And as I say, the spillover into New South Wales because of those existing connections is extremely high. And we're doing everything we can to reduce that, to suppress that, which has been our strategy all along. But I also do want to issue a warning, and can I be plain about this? And I'm sorry I have to be so strong, but I don't doesn't bother me how many people are personally upset with me at the decisions we'll have to take, but we have to protect the community. We have to protect the community. And I ask everybody who feels that their freedom is limited or what they're used to doing is limited, think about the consequences. For our poor Melburnians, to be in lockdown for 6 weeks is not a situation I want anyone in New South Wales to be in. And we have to take every measure we can to make sure we don't find ourselves in that situation. So I appreciate you might be angry and frustrated and you might have to wait a bit longer, but think of the consequences if we don't do what we're doing. Think of what the alternatives are. And again, I will continue to make decisions on behalf of my government and based on the health advice completely freely.